Hi, I'm Amanda Call, and today I would like to talk about critique, criticism, and confidence. So I mentioned in my Was Art School Worth It video that one of the skills that I really developed while I was at art school was the ability to critique and take critique effectively. And I was thinking about it and realized that that really was a topic that deserved entirely its own video. So here we are. We're going to talk about what is critique, what is criticism, what is the difference between them, what are some good types of critique, what are some less helpful types of critique, and how you can incorporate them into your work. So a quick point of clarification before we go onward. Very frequently you hear the word critique and the word criticism used largely interchangeably. When you're talking about critiquing or criticizing, say, somebody's behavior, you're talking about either analyzing and providing feedback on it in a gentle or constructive way versus a mean way. And that's not really how I'm using those words here. That can be correct in some contexts, but in the context of creating artwork, we're going to be using critique to mean feedback that is coming from peers or superiors on a work while it is still in progress, and it's usually voluntarily solicited and integrated into the art-making process. Whereas criticism is going to mean feedback from an audience after a work is finished. Usually it's offered whether you want it or not, and it's often used by an audience to determine whether art is worth investing their time in. So with that out of the way, let's get into the first one, which is critique. Getting critique is a really important part of the art making process. It can be really helpful to have somebody who is on the outside of what you are working on and whose judgment you trust to look at what you're working on and give you some feedback on how you're doing, maybe offer pointers to make your work more successful, maybe bring things to light that you hadn't realized about your work, or offer you some additional direction. If you're working on something that's a commission, or you're working on part of a production pipeline for some type of commercial art project, then critique is usually a part of that process. Whoever is paying you in the case of a private commission, or whoever your superior is, like an art director in the case of a piece of commercial art, is going to at certain points check in on the work and give you feedback. Whether that's feedback on an initial sketch to see if you've got the right idea, or feedback on pencils to see if you've got the details right before you finally commit and finish everything. This is a part of the process to ensure that whatever you are being paid to create, it's coming out the way that the people who are paying for it expect it to. An important part of critique is that it is goal-oriented, and that goal is to improve what you are working on. These goals and the related critiques can be really broad or really narrowly focused. So for example, I do a lot of work in the game design sphere, and very frequently I'll be a part of game development sessions and playtests. And so for a game, an example of a broad critique is, was it fun? Whereas a more narrow critique would be something like, do you feel like the damage versus the damage resistance mechanic was balanced? For an example, in a visual art piece like an illustration, a broad piece of critique was, does this piece strike the right mood or convey the basic information it's trying to? And a more narrow critique would be something like, the posing on this hand looks a little wonky, maybe try rotating the wrist out or splaying the fingers more. You're talking about the overall impact of the piece versus really narrow little details, and you can get successful critique on any of those levels. Also, part of what's distinct about critique is that it is usually solicited from specific sources. Like I said, if you're being commissioned by someone, the person who is paying you to make a piece of artwork is the person that is going to be giving you critique at different points to make sure that you're making what they want. If you're working on a personal project or even a commercial project, you may be soliciting critique from your peers, other artists or other people who are familiar with the type of art that you're working on, who have relevant experience. If I'm part of a game project, then we're going to be looking for other game designers or experienced players to play the game and let us know how it's working. If I'm working on a comic project, then I'm going to be showing the comic to a lot of my artist friends, a lot of my comic friends, a lot of my writer friends, to try to get a nice broad range of critique that is still applicable to what I'm working on. A very, very specific type of critique that is very important and deserves entirely its own video, its own like series of videos, and I just don't even have time to get into here, is sensitivity reading. Sensitivity readers or editors are people who come in and review your work for content that you as a creator may not have the relevant life experience in to handle as sensitively or as accurately as you would want to. Sensitivity readers and editors are often very specific and looking for very specific things. So this might be somebody who's consulting you on your portrayal of a particular culture that you don't belong to, a religion you don't belong to. If you have any conflict in your work that has to do with racism or trauma or disability or something like that. So you have somebody who actually has experience in those relevant areas to look over your work to make sure that you're portraying them in a way that is honest and genuine and not causing additional harm by perpetuating negative stereotypes. So it's important for art to be able to cover tough topics, but you have to have the humility to understand that sometimes you are not actually the most knowledgeable or experienced person to be approaching those topics. And so at the bare minimum, you need someone else to come in and give you advice on whether or not you are handling those topics appropriately. So what makes good critique? Well, good critique is actionable. And by actionable, it means that when someone gives you that critique, that is something that you can then do. There is an action that you can take in response to that critique. Sometimes in order for a critique to be actionable, it has to be very specific too. Like, what exactly do you see that is not working or is not helping to get my piece toward its goal? So for example, you're trying to make a spooky illustration that's got like a creepy atmosphere to it. You show it to someone to critique and ask, hey, is this coming off as spooky? And they look at it and they go, it's really not. You're not really hitting that spooky mood. Okay, what is not working? What is not spooky? If they just say, I don't know, it's just not spooky, that's not helpful and that's not actionable. But if they look at it and they go, that tree back there, rather than looking like a haunted spooky tree, looks more like a happy cartoon fun time tree with a big bubbly head of leaves on it, and it's just kind of ruining the mood because it's not as spooky as it should be. That's actionable. That's something specific. You can change that one tree and make it a spooky gnarled tree instead of a fluffy cartoon tree. Critique should also be relevant. It should be about the thing you are asking about and oriented to the goal of your piece. Any piece of artwork that you are creating has a goal. It is trying to achieve something. You are trying to communicate something, or you are trying to convey a specific experience. It's important that whoever's providing the critique for you understands what that goal is so that they can help to get you further to it. Good critique is also not unnecessarily cruel. Reality can hurt. If you're struggling on an art piece especially and things are not turning out the way that you want them to, like, that's already not a fun time. You don't need someone to look at your piece and then provide critique in like a mean way that further beats you down. Discussing what is or isn't working in the piece should not become something that's personal. I wish I could say I'd never heard anything like this, but some people are just not very good at providing constructive feedback that is not also like really unnecessarily mean. And if you solicit critique from somebody and it turns out that they are one of those people who is just not capable of being nice when they're providing critique, stop going to them for critique. It's not good for you. Like, yeah, reality can hurt, but you don't have to be a dick about it. So that kind of segues us into the next section, which is, what is bad critique? Obviously, being unnecessarily cruel to someone is bad critique because they're going to be too busy having their feelings hurt about why you're so freaking rude that they're not going to even be able to gain anything useful out of that critique if there is anything useful to gain. Non-actionable advice is also not good critique. If someone tells you that something isn't working but they don't explain why or how, and therefore you have nothing to respond to, nothing to work on, well, that's not very useful. What am I supposed to work on when you tell me, I don't know, I'm just not feeling it, it's just not working? Well, what part? What am I supposed to fix here? You also want to be careful about critique that is very much tailored to someone's specific taste. This is part of why you kind of have to vet who you ask about which things for feedback. So, for example, if I'm working on a horror comic, I'm not going to ask a friend who I know is very squeamish to review my horror comic for me and provide critique on it because they're going to be too squicked out by what's going on in the comic to be able to offer me, like, actual good technical advice. They're just going to be going, I don't like it. That would be rude of me. Why would I do that to my friend? It isn't just about something as specific as horror, though. If you know in general that something you are working on is just not a particular person's taste or in their wheelhouse, then they're probably not the best person to ask for a critique, because it's just not really their jam, and they're not going to be able to really understand what you're going for or have constructive advice to give you necessarily. And then there is my personal least favorite type of bad critique. The completely irrelevant. We're gonna go like full food metaphor here for a minute, so if you don't want to see that, then just skip ahead to this time.
Here you go.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, thank you.
So, what do you think?
Yeah, that's really good. Are you looking for feedback?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, yeah, awesome. I really like what you're doing with the flavor here overall. Yeah, it's real good. I'm really enjoying it. The texture's good, yeah. I think I have a little bit of feedback on the crust.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good. It's just I feel like it would be better if the crust was, instead of being like flaky, if it were like bready, like kind of like more bready and airy, right?
Interesting. I hadn't thought of that. I'll have to give that some consideration.
And the filling. The flavor is really good. Yeah. The flavor is really good on the filling, but what if, instead of apples, it was beef?
What?
Yeah, like ground beef. So then you would have like the bread on the top and the bottom, and then like ground beef in the middle.
Wait, you mean like a burger?
What? No, it would still be like your pie, just, better, because it would have like the bread and the beef, and it would still like taste like your pie, and it would still be your pie, it's still your pie. It's just, it would be better with bread and beef instead of crust and apples.
That's not what I was asking about. You want to change the thing that I am working on into a completely different thing. That's not offering feedback on my project. That's trying to offer feedback on a non-existent project that you wish my project was, apparently? The worst. I hate that type of feedback so much. It shows a clear just misunderstanding of what we're even talking about and is therefore completely useless, because the person who is providing this critique is providing critique on something that doesn't exist, because they want your pie to be a burger, and it's not. It's a pie. Judge it on the merits of pie. Alright, so these are all different ways that good critique can be given by yourself or by others, and good ways to solicit and get good critique coming towards you. Oh, now what are you gonna do once you get it? First off, don't take it personally. None of us is perfect. Our work is not perfect, and our work is always evolving. You solicited critique in order to improve, so you need to kind of train yourself to not react defensively like, oh no, but it is good, how dare you attack my baby, and instead listen to what they're saying, listen to it with an open mind. You don't have to take all of the advice you get on a critique, by the way. This is an important thing as well. Just because someone gave you a certain piece of advice in a critique does not mean you have to follow it. Like, you should definitely consider it. You should take it under consideration, and depending on the person's experience level and relevant experience to what you're doing, then you might really, really want to consider taking it, and it might be a good idea to take it. But you don't have to. You're not obligated to. You can use your own judgment. This is still your work, and you know what you're trying to achieve, and if someone provides critique that doesn't seem like it's going to work, you don't necessarily have to do it. Or maybe try it, but don't make it like the final version of what you're working on. Like try a study, try an experiment. You don't necessarily have to immediately completely integrate these ideas, but give them a little bit of space and try them out. Criticism. Like I said earlier, criticism is what your audience gives as feedback to your work once it's done and it's out in the world. And criticism is less important for making art than it is for selling art. Critique is really about making the art the best it can be, while criticism tells you who your audience is and how they feel about your work. So much like critique, criticism can be very general or very specific. General criticism is, I liked it, 5 stars. And more specific criticism is, the expression on this character's face in this one panel totally gut punched me. It was so good. Criticism is also often very influenced by taste. Now you're talking about your thing is out there in the world. Literally anyone can be looking at it. This is not a curated selection of the people you trust to give you feedback that are providing feedback on it. And a lot of people just aren't going to be into it because it's just not their thing. Like, your work is not going to cater to absolutely everyone. That's just impossible. So there are going to be some people who look at it and just go, nah, I'm not into it. Or people who look at it and go, ugh, this is terrible. Which doesn't necessarily mean your work is actually terrible. It can just mean it was totally not their thing and they don't have a better way to articulate why it's not their thing. Because that's another thing that's important to remember, is that not everyone understands how to be a critic. Everyone has an opinion, but not everyone knows how to frame and express that opinion in a constructive way or in a critical way wherein they actually pick out the things that didn't work for them or didn't work in general and present that coherently. Usually when you hear someone criticizing something or providing their feedback on how they feel about a thing, it's very emotional and it's usually not a very studied and critical kind of response. It's just like a liked it, did not like it, and as an extrapolation from that, the best, the worst. And in general, my personal inclination is to just say, ignore it. Because most people's opinions, don't, matter in the grand scheme of things. Okay, but don't actually ignore it. Because criticism can be very valuable in telling you who your audience is and what works for them. So the people who are responding to your work positively, who are loving it, listen to what they are saying about what they love about it. So what exactly is your audience responding to? What are the things that they love? What are the things that they are gushing about? What are the things that landed really well or that they really seemed to latch onto? What are the parts that they didn't like, that they maybe are just kind of lukewarm on, or they're responding with, that part wasn't really my favorite? These are good things to consider when you're working on future projects wherein you are trying to capture the same audience or use the same audience for future marketing. If you know that there's something in particular in your work that they really like and that they typically respond to, you can use that as a tease for when you're marketing a future project of, hey, I've got that thing that I know you like. It's coming soon. We need to make a living. Okay, I'm talking about us making a living. Sometimes it has to be a little mercenary. I'm not really a fan of having to do all this marketing stuff either, but sometimes it's what we've got to do. And if you understand who your audience is, it makes your life a lot easier when you're trying to do that. Also, when you get something out into the public eye, you can receive criticism about it that you and your critique squad did not ever think of, good or bad. This is a thing that happens so much in the game design sphere. I'll be on a game design project and we will playtest with everybody on the design team and all of our friends and all of our family members, and then we have other acquaintances test it out with their friends, and we think we understand how this game works, and then we get it to the table with a bunch of strangers at a convention, and all of a sudden a completely different experience is revealed. Because you're just suddenly interacting with a whole bunch more people you would have never actually interacted with before. This can be good, this can be bad. It can definitely give you new perspective that is worth integrating into your creative process and weighing as part of your creative decisions in the future. And again, as far as receiving critique goes, do not take it personally. Your work is now being viewed by everyone. Everyone now has access to something once it is published or posted online or released as a product. Now anyone can get their hands on it, and you cannot please everyone. Some people are just not gonna be into your thing. It's just not gonna be their thing. That's okay. Also, once your work is out there, it's done. Once a book is printed and in somebody's hands, you can't snatch it back out of them and glue a new page in there because you thought of a better way to explain something. You need to learn to accept that whatever it is that you've created is done, and if there are things that need to be changed in the future, say if you're talking about a game design product for a second edition, or to just kind of wrap your brain around for future creative projects that are similar, roll those reactions into your brain, make them a part of your creative process and your notes, and take them into consideration for the future, but try not to dwell on something that cannot be changed. So my very good friend, a fellow comic writer and con mom, Margaret Lundberg, sent me this in a little package that she sent me one time, and I keep it over my desk where I can see it all the time when I'm working. And it's this little card, and it says, "You don't suck. You don't suck." Critique and criticism can be hard to take, but people offering them is a sign that they care about your work. When you receive critique, this is advice that you're soliciting in order to make your work better. People are offering it and spending the time to go over your work and analyze it and provide this feedback because they care, because they see that there is value in your work and they want to help you improve that work and reach that potential. When it comes to criticism, someone not liking your work may be a matter of taste, or they may just not get it because it's not really for them. Maybe that means that you have work to do to refine your approach because you feel like what you were trying to say was fairly obvious, but people didn't get it. Well, that might mean that you have some more work to do. But neither of these, people not liking it or people not getting it, are the worst case scenario. I'll tell you what the worst case scenario is. The worst case scenario is no one gives any critique or criticism at all. That's very bad. Maybe in the case of critique, that means you haven't found your audience yet. Maybe it actually does mean that what you are working on is fundamentally flawed, and therefore people aren't responding to it because it's just not working, and the way that you have it constructed, it's not going to. But just because what you are working on is fundamentally flawed does not mean that you are as a creator. It just means that you have more work to do. If tons and tons of people tell you that they love your work, or that there are a lot of things in your work that they enjoy or appreciate, and they have a handful of things that they don't like, or there are a handful of people who don't like your work or feel that you could improve, that is good. Think about all of those people who love your work. You're doing awesome because you're creating stuff and you're putting it out there and you're listening to this feedback. That is great. Needing to do more work and people caring enough to be invested to give you the feedback to do that work is good. That's a good place to be. Literally none of us is perfect and none of our work is perfect. It is always going to garner some amount of criticism. It is always going to need some type of improvement. The most important thing to keep in mind with critique and criticism and maintaining your own self-confidence is, who are you creating this artwork for? And is the audience you're creating it for getting what they are supposed to out of it? If someone is paying for your artwork, is paying you to create this artwork, are they satisfied? Did you deliver what they wanted? If it's a personal thing that you are creating, are you achieving your goals? This doesn't necessarily mean that people like whatever you're creating, because, for example, you could be making a thought-provoking social commentary piece that maybe people aren't meant to enjoy, but if they're disturbed and having in-depth conversations about it and you're igniting a conversation and that type of thought, then you've achieved your goal. That's awesome. And if the person that you are creating art for is you, then are you satisfied? You're the only one who needs to be satisfied in that situation. Sometimes just creating, whether or not it's coming out great, is enough. So I'm curious, what is some of the best critique or criticism that you've ever received? What was some of the worst? Let me know down in the comments section. I will probably pitch in with a few of my own good and bad stories. If you liked this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, share it with people, do all of the YouTube things that we gotta do on the YouTubes. Thanks everybody, and I will see you next time. Bye!
Is this entire bit just an excuse for me to get to eat pie in the middle of the day? Maybe.